Commanders hire Eric Bieniemy to be the offense coordinator here in Washington, as well as the assistant head coach, while also making multiple moves to clear up some cap space. We'll be going over all of that and much more right now on the Next Gen Fan Podcast. This is the Next Gen Fan Podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you are not subscribed to this podcast, please make sure you do that. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find me on YouTube if you would like to subscribe there as well. So, before I get into my thoughts on Eric Bieniemy, the Washington Commanders have made two roster moves today. The cutting of both safety Bobby McCain and quarterback Carson Wentz. Now, first off, let's start with McCain. McCain, a guy that played in Miami multiple years ago, was really successful there in creating turnovers. Eventually, he became a cap casualty, and during Ron Rivera's tenure here in Washington, in his first year, Bobby McCain was on the market. Washington needed depth at the safety/corner position, and McCain was the fix. Now, I have not been a huge fan of Bob McCain. I think that he is, while he's made some splash plays, I think he's just kind of an all-right player, and there's nothing against Bob McCain, but I've really thought all along that Washington could do better. I was not a fan when they gave him that extension last year, and I am glad that they're going to try and go with some younger depth, whether that be, you see the breakout of Derek Forrest this year, and you've got Cam Curl, along with hopefully Percy Butler, who will be taking another step, hopefully in 2023. But this cut of Bob McCain is going to save the team about $4.42 million on the cap. That's money that can be spent on a Cam Curl extension. That's money that can be spent on a Daron Payne extension. They like to play Bob McCain a lot at that slot corner position as well as that Buffalo nickel position. With Percy Butler hopefully going to be taking another step, I think Butler can move to that slot corner position or that Buffalo nickel position, and then you have your two safeties in Curl and Derek Forrest. Another reason for this cut was Bob McCain was the Commanders' 11th highest paid player on the team, and you look at that, he's definitely not worthy of that position, and that's nothing against Bob McCain, but that's money that can be spent for other players, whether that be free agency, giving guys extensions. In his 2 years here in Washington, McCain had 4 interceptions. Now, 2 of those interceptions came against Jake Fromm in Week 18, a quarterback who will probably never play again in the NFL. Then you have 14 passes defended, 1 forced fumble, 139 combined tackles, and 3 tackles for loss. Bob McCain did not have any turnovers last year. His 4 interceptions and his 1 fumble all came from 2 seasons ago. And for me, I think this is a excellent decision for Washington. You are going to give young guys a chance to continue to improve. Bob McCain's 29. He'll be turning 30 later this year. So this is really a really good spot for Washington to be in, to be able to have young depth, to be able to supplement, okay football players like Bob McCain, and hopefully have those young guys develop into something a little bit more than that. As I said, I think that this is a good move going forward just for the cap. I think that this money could be directly funneled into a Daron Payne or a Cam Curl extension, which would be really huge for this team. Curl, obviously a guy who is really impactful on this team, and while he may not be publicly or nationally recognized for that, look at the defense without Curl. If you remember last season, the defense was extremely awful without Cameron Curl during those few weeks when he was injured, and then Curl comes back and they begin to play a little better. So he is a big piece in the secondary, and then as well as giving Daron Payne an extension, which we'll be talking about later in this episode. Now, Carson Wentz, he also got his walking papers, and this clears $26.1 million in the cap. This is a no-brainer decision. We knew this was happening. The only thing we didn't know was when. I'm glad the Commanders got this out of the way, because this has just really been a disaster from the start. If you remember, On March 9th of 2022, Carson Wentz was traded from the Indianapolis Colts to Washington. The Colts received a 2022 second and a 2022 third, along with a 2022 third round pick, and Washington got a 2022 second. So the Commanders and the Colts swapped second round picks in 2022, and the Colts got 2 thirds. Washington also paid his full salary that year, and it all resulted in a total of 8 games played for Carson Wentz, 1,755 yards, 11 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 26 sacks, a 62.3 completion percentage, and a total record of 2-5 as the starter. So first off, with Carson Wentz, this, as I said, this is the right move, and this is going to be very helpful for this team going forward, just to, move on from this guy. There is no reason to have kept Carson Wentz on this roster. As I said, this was a really clear-cut decision, not to mention with the news about Sam Howell going into camp as the number 1 QB, but as well as you see how poor of a performance Carson Wentz had when he came in at the end of the season against the Browns, which was one of their worst games of the season, as well as his record. 2-5 through 9 picks and took 26 sacks in 8 games, which is absurd. And we knew coming in with Carson Wentz that this was definitely a reclamation project. This was a guy who struggled in Indy. He put up some decent numbers, but it wasn't anything flashy. And when he came to Washington, it was pretty evident early on that this guy was just not the answer. He constantly struggled under pressure, and some of his decisions, especially I'm thinking back to that Cleveland game where he was missing guys who were wide open and making terrible decisions to instead throw. There are multiple throws that game where he threw into double coverage. Some of them were picked off. It definitely shows that this team still cannot get the quarterback position right. 1 year later, they're releasing the quarterback they traded for. But 2, it does help in some sense that they are, in a sense, owning up to their mistakes and getting rid of this guy. And it was clearly evident. Washington early on said they had confidence in Carson Wentz, and they gave us all that chatter. But if you really had confidence in your QB, you would have given him an extension, or you would have guaranteed that money into the 3 years he had. Instead, Washington allowed that get out of jail for free card, where they could cut him in 1 year for no cost, and that is indeed what they have done. So overall, this is, unfortunately, a good move for Washington, and I say unfortunately because you would have liked for this to have worked out, but overall, they still are in this quarterback carousel. $26.1 million in cap, that is a ton of cap space. This is going to be very helpful for Washington, again, in a Daron Payne extension. And now, obviously, it's not the way this works. You're not going to funnel that cap money right into an extension because you are looking for some improvements in free agency. But hopefully they can take a chunk of that at least and maybe go for Curl, maybe go for a guy in Daron Payne, and hopefully allow for those guys not to hit the open market. With that being said, Eric Bieniemy was introduced to Washington in his introductory press conference a few days ago. And first off, this is something that really should not have happened for a team like Washington to have gotten the offensive coordinator of the team with the best offense for the last 5 years. It really is something incredible when you think about it. And at first, when I heard rumors about Eric Bieniemy coming to Washington, I really kind of scoffed at them. I was like, why would Eric Bieniemy come to a poor team like Washington to be their OC for a lateral move? And it seems that this guy who's had multiple head coaching interviews, who has not gotten a head coaching job, and it looks like that really is going to be the only way for him to get a job, is to get out from Andy Reid's wing and to go and build a successful offense somewhere else. It's what we saw Matt LaFleur do. He went from the Rams to the Titans, and then 1 year later went to Green Bay and is currently the head coach there. So this is a really good hire for Washington. A really good hire. This is the best offensive coordinator on the market, and Washington somehow got him. I was ecstatic when I found out about this. This is a huge win for the Commanders. a guy who has been learning from Andy Reid, one as the offensive coordinator for 5 years, but he has been with Andy Reid since 2013, since Andy Reid arrived in KC, 9 years there, and really a unbelievable hire for Washington. Multiple Kansas City players were praising Andy Reid or praising Eric Bieniemy throughout the Super Bowl run for the Chiefs this year. Eric Bieniemy was getting a ton of praise from Andy Reid himself throughout the playoffs this year, and once again, this is the OC of the best offense for the last 5 years, and this is a guy who has had multiple different weapons. And now, yeah, you can say he's had Patrick Mahomes, and yeah, that's a huge factor. I mean, you can't take that away. But whether that be their receiving weapons, their running back depth, Eric Bieniemy has been somehow involved, even if he didn't do a thing. Even if he just stood there and Andy Reid ran all the offensive meetings, and Andy Reid called all the plays, and Eric Bieniemy was just a statue there. He's been there with Andy Reid, learning for 9 years, and that has value itself. We're from a team in the Chiefs who have won 2 Super Bowls under Andy Reid and have been to the playoffs multiple times. A team that continues to return to the AFC Championship game year after year after year. This has been the most successful team in football over the past few years, and we just got their offensive coordinator. That is a huge win. I do have really high expectations for Eric Bieniemy, and that's because he is coming from the best offense in football over the past 5 years. I really expect some big changes here in Washington. I expect for our weapons to be fully utilized. Oftentimes last year, I was really getting a little angry at Scott Turner because there were games on end where Terry McLaurin didn't touch the ball until the second half. Curtis Samuel didn't get a catch. I mean, your guys who are your top players at your skills position were not getting reps, were not getting touches. I think this is something that's going to change with Eric Bieniemy, and I think that this is also something that's going to be good for Ron Rivera, because Scott Turner was a guy who Ron brought in who probably would never have called plays anywhere else outside of Ron Rivera, and Ron Rivera really had a say in what Scott Turner ran. With Eric Bieniemy, while still, yes, Ron Rivera is technically above him in the coaching tier, I am hoping that this is going to be Eric Bieniemy's offense, and Ron Rivera is not going to touch it, because as much as the run game was good, seeing Brian Robinson get at it and drag guys for 10, 12 yards, this is a passing league, and I need to see Eric Bieniemy be able to not be chained to Ron Rivera's 2-to-1 run ratio. I don't want that. That is just going to hinder him and make this offense, it's going to limit this offense's potential. So I'm hoping that this is going to be a chance for Ron Rivera to just leave Eric Bieniemy alone, let Eric Bieniemy do what Eric Bieniemy wants to do, and then when Sunday comes, you're going to reap those benefits. I really think that is something that if Ron Rivera kind of stays out of Eric Bieniemy's way in a sense, and allows for Eric Bieniemy to run the offense the way he wants to run it, I think that that's going to be really key in seeing what Eric Bieniemy can fully do with these weapons. And he mentioned that in his press conference. He's listing guys who I really think he can turn into weapons and fully utilize their potential. And one thing to note during that press conference was that there were multiple players there in the front row as Eric Bieniemy was giving his press conference, and Bieniemy was talking to those players. He's giving them, encouragement, getting them excited about, him being able to coach this offense. I think that this is going to be good for guys like Jahan Dotson to help him fully develop, to really have a guy who can utilize all the skills. I think this is going to be good for Curtis Samuel. And I think this is going to be good for Antonio Gibson. Obviously, I think Terry McLaurin is going to excel, but those 3 guys who, have really good potential, and yet we fully have not been able to unlock their potential yet, I think Eric Bieniemy is going to be the guy to do it. And I think it's going to be this is going to be an explosive offense, and I'm really excited what he's going to do with Sam Howell. I think this is a great opportunity for Washington, not only to give Sam Howell a shot, which I think is the best move going forward outside of taking a guy and trading up and getting a guy like Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or Will Levis or somebody in the draft. I think this is the best option to go with Sam Howell. Let Eric Bieniemy coach up Sam Howell, and let's see what he can do. I think that this is ultimately going to be a really good chance to see under a guy who's a proven coordinator what he can do with our weapons and what he can do with Sam Howell's potential with that mobility of Sam Howell with his arm, and being able to fully utilize the strengths of our players and not be so focused in on whatever he wants to run. Because you see that around the NFL a lot where coaches want to run their schemes and are not really, focused on getting the most out of their players and running what's best for their players. And I think Eric Bieniemy is going to be a guy who can do that, who's going to put aside whatever it is he wants to run and understand that, okay, this is what these guys excel at. This is what I'm going to do. And I think that is going to be really, really good for Washington. It seems like a guy, you're watching his introductory press conference, and if you guys have not watched that yet, make sure you do. It really is a really good press conference. It seems like a guy who's ready to get to work, and I know that's, you could say that about anybody in their introductory press conference, but I do like how he's saying, when he was asked about, is this a step to potentially getting a head coaching job, he really kind of just pushed that question aside and, said that he's focusing on here in Washington. He's not focused on, his next job, possibly getting a head coaching job down the road, which is, obviously really is his main reason here. I like him not really going out and saying that, and so far from what I've seen, this guy looks to be legit, and I'm really excited for Eric Bieniemy. So, with that being said, moving on to a quick note on Daron Payne, just a quick update. With the Commanders releasing Wentz and McCain, obviously this opens the door for more potential cap for a Daron Payne extension, and there's two avenues I want to discuss real quick before we move on. One is Daron Payne, what he's going to be asking for. It's probably going to be around $20 million, just looking at what Jonathan Allen got. So $20 million for one DT is a lot. $40 million for two DTs, which is going to be what you're going to be paying with both Allen and Payne around that area, is a lot for defensive tackles, especially when those two guys aren't always on the field. Edge rushers generally are on the field for most plays. DTs generally rotate out. So it's a lot of money for two players who aren't going to be on the field consistently. With that being said, their other option, besides letting him hit the open market, is to franchise tag him, which would be $18.9 million. So it's really, at that point, you might as well just sign him to a contract. In my opinion, Washington should either trade Daron Payne or they should sign him. They should not franchise tag him. The franchise tag here in Washington, look at most recently with Brandon Sheriff, it does not work out here. And you look out throughout the league, it generally doesn't work out for most players either. And I understand if you were a good team, right? If this was a team like the Bills, the Bengals, someone who was in the playoffs, then yeah, you'd want to franchise tag your guys because you don't want to pay out the money for a long-term deal. But you're a contending team, and you want to be able to make sure that you can keep your stars around. Obviously, that is not the case here in Washington. So when it comes to signing Daron Payne, I still think they should give him a contract because of the playmaking ability he has. You have to plan around guys like Allen and Payne. Those are really two guys who you are not going to find if you draft DTs over and over again in the first round. But you can't franchise tag this guy because, again, you're not a contending team. So if you're not going to lock him up long term, then I would get what you can for him and trade him. While you're not going to get, a great haul in return. Hopefully they can get some draft capital and use that to build up this offensive line or, get some better DBs. Overall, as I mentioned, it's either trade him or sign him, but do not tag Daron Payne. All right, so coming up next, we'll be discussing who else Washington should cut, as well as looking at some of the top headlines in the NFL. All right, so looking through the Commanders' cap and who they're going to have on their roster going to 2023, I have compiled a list of about 4 players who the Commanders could possibly cut. And you guys, this will be up in a poll on Spotify. So if you would like to vote on this, you guys can. Once again, that will be on a poll on Spotify. My 4 players I have: Kendall Fuller, Chase Roulier, Logan Thomas, and Andrew Norwell. So Kendall Fuller, he is making $11.6 million on the cap. If they cut him today, it would be a $3.1 million dead cap hit. Chase Roulier, $12.4 million on the cap, $18.1 million dead cap. So it's almost not worth it there, but still an option. Logan Thomas, $8.6 million on the cap currently, and a dead cap hit of $3.5 million. And then Andrew Norwell, who is currently on the cap for $5 million, and a release would be $2.8 million in dead cap. So, first off, Kendall Fuller. Now, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like people are as anxious to get rid of Kendall Fuller as I am. I really see him as kind of he's definitely overpaid, no doubt about that. But I see Kendall Fuller as a guy who is, maybe on a really good team, a 3rd corner, possibly a 4th corner. He's not a number 1 corner, and here's why. I think that Kendall Fuller, and this may be something with how they run the defense, but when you watch Kendall Fuller, he does not play too much press. He doesn't stay up in the defender's face, and he gets beat a lot. Just to put it plainly, he gets beat a lot. That's not a guy I want to be paying $11.6 million on my cap. So that should be a player who could be cut, definitely. Chase Roulier, $12.4 million on the cap. Not that Roulier hasn't been good, but 2 seasons now where he's had major injuries. And if you're Washington, I definitely think you need to try and find a center in the draft. But as well as you got to figure out whether you need to move on from Chase Roulier. Roulier, as I mentioned, 2 major injuries, and when he's been on the field, he is good. But it's these injuries that have cost many, many weeks of us being without Chase Roulier that have me concerned. So, Chase Roulier, he is an option. Logan Thomas, $8.6 million, and again, this is injuries. I liked Logan Thomas in 2020, and then over 2021 and 2022, this guy's been banged up on and off the field, and the production has really, really dropped off. If he could get up to the production we were seeing back in 2020, then I would say keep him. But currently $8.6 million on the cap, a 3.5 dead cap hit if they release him today. And then finally, Andrew Norwell, who is currently on the cap for $5 million. Andrew Norwell was not good last year, to put it nicely. He really struggled, and while the pass pro was a lot worse than the run pro, it really does, show Ron Rivera trying to bring in a guy who, like Trey Turner, a guy who he knew back in Carolina, who had went to Jacksonville and came back and really was not a very successful signing for the Commanders. This one is a no-brainer for me. Out of the 4 players I listed, the one I think that they should get rid of the most is Andrew Norwell, and here's why. At DB, Benjamin St-Juste is a lock to be your number 2 corner. If Fuller was released, your number 1. But outside of that, you really don't have too many other options, whether it be Rashad Wildgoose or Christian Holmes or some free agent they signed. So with that, I still think they need to keep Fuller, just as, you don't really have any other better options. Chase Roulier, they don't have any other really good centers outside of Tyler Larson, who has also dealt with injuries, so I'm really not feeling too confident giving Larson the job because he's also been banged up. And, with a dead cap hit of $8.1 million, it's almost not worth it in that sense to cut Chase Roulier. Logan Thomas, well, I really want to see a lot from Cole Turner this year. He was really hyped coming out of training camp, and then injuries and just he didn't see the field a lot. It really was kind of disappointing. So I'm not sure what we're going to see from him, as well as John Bates is a good receiving tight end, but he's primarily a blocker. So with that being said, they don't have too many other guys who can really step in. Amari Rodgers was a good player, but again, limited production and limited action on the field. So that's the reason why I would keep Logan Thomas. Again, because you don't really have guys outside of Cole Turner and John Bates who I would really like to see. It wouldn't be the end of the world, though, if they cut Logan Thomas. I think that is also another option. But if I had to cut one out of the four, Andrew Norwell is the guy I'm going with. And the reason is not because Washington has any other good players behind Andrew Norwell, although I will want to see Chris Paul. I think he played really well in the Week 18 game against the Cowboys. It's because he's just so bad they need to move on from him. And it's really, you can't keep paying Andrew Norwell $5 million on the cap. Therefore, we'll take the $2.8 million dead cap hit. Moving on, a quick note. The Rams have had trade talks regarding cornerback Jalen Ramsey, and it looks like he is going to be traded within the coming weeks. Now, this story came out on February 24th per the NFL, and it appears that Ramsey, who's been with the Rams since 2019, he was traded from Jacksonville, where he was originally drafted. It appears that Ramsey, who in 2022 did not miss a start and had a fairly successful season, including 4 picks, 18 passes defended, 88 tackles, and 2 forced fumbles, however, is going to possibly be a cap casualty. He's due about $17 million in the next season. And again, this is a few days after the Rams cut Bobby Wagner. Once again, Wagner getting paid a lot of money, and the Rams trying to clear out some cap. So Jalen Ramsey potentially going to be traded, as well as the NFL scouting combine begins today and will run all the way through March 6th. February 27th to March 6th is the date. And you look at your dates for when you're going to be watching. Your coverage begins on March 2nd. And obviously that will end on March 5th. So the combine itself for us fans is not going to begin until March 2nd. But it will begin for the players today on February 27th. We have gotten news from the combine that quarterbacks CJ Stroud and Will Levis will be going and will be throwing. And then also running back Bijan Robinson out of Texas is also going to attend the NFL combine. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Next Gen Fan Podcast. If you would like to vote in the poll on who Washington should cut, you can find that on Spotify. I also will have a question posted as well, and you could answer that as well. If you have any questions you would like answered on this podcast, you can send me a voice recording. A link down in the description will be available for that, as well as if you would like to listen or subscribe on YouTube, a link will also be in the description, and I really appreciate that as well. I salute armed forces, firefighters, police officers, and emergency personnel. God bless you, and God bless America.